this song, Brother Roger will bring our message, 523. There is beyond the azure blue a God concealed from human sight. He decked the skies with heavenly dew and framed the worlds with his great might.
There is a God.
There is a God.
He is alive. We live
And in we
and we
live,
survive.
and we survive from dust of God. Created man is our God, the great I am. There was a long, long time ago a God whose voice the prophets heard. He is a God that we should know, who speaks from his inspired word.
There is a
There
God.
is a God, he is alive,
And we live
and we live,
survive.
and we survive from dust of God, created man. He is our God, the great I am. Our God, who shone upon a tree, a light voice willing there to give, that he from sin might set man free, and evermore with him could live.
There is a
There
God.
is a God, he is alive, and in we live, and we survive from dust of God, created man. He is our God, the great I am. Please mark 368. That'll be our song of invitation, 368.
One of my preachers, when I was growing up, eventually became a sheriff. And he was speaking in a congregation one evening talking about drugs, and there was a little child in there making a little noise. He said, "You let that baby cry in church. I've seen too many crying in jail. I know I've told you that before, but you let those babies cry in church." The atheist boldly proclaims there is no God. He more than likely will boldly proclaim that evolution is how everything got here, but he cannot explain how evolution may have started. The true believer in God boldly proclaims that God is. There's no doubt in his or her mind that God is. And also, if they are true believers, they know that we came here by an act of creation by God. Is there a God? And why does it matter if there is a God? When you think of the question, you think about the God we're talking about. We're talking about the God in this lesson who made all things. Not just any God. The God of creation. Not the God of deism that says, well, God maybe made it and he started everything going and just let it go. Not only is the God of the Bible our creator, but he is very interested and involved in the affairs of men. The question still comes about, how did everything get here? There is a law in science that will be boldly proclaimed by any scientist, and especially in the study of physics, called law of cause and effect. The cause is always greater than the effect. You know that a nail will not drive a hammer. It takes a hammer of greater weight than the nail, with some kind of force behind the hammer to move the hammer, put it into motion, and drive a nail into a piece of wood. The law of cause and effect is observable every single day. Well, the earth is here. The question is the effect greater or lesser than the cause? Well, obviously the cause is greater. What is, or who is that cause? Those are some serious things to think about. You think about matter itself. Everything we know of is physical. You have a spirit, you can't see it, but everything basically we think about is matter. That matter, from our perspective, from the human experience, cannot be created or destroyed. It can only be changed from one form to another. Take, for example, a tree that grows in a certain place. Time it'll be cut down, it'll be used for fire. But the tree does not go out of existence when it turns into ashes. It simply changes form. You cannot create matter. You can't get rid of it. You may change its form, but you cannot literally destroy it. Not from our perspective. So that's called the law of conservation of energy and also conservation of matter. All scientists would agree with this. You think about the law of cause and effect then. The cause of life, the cause of the universe, the cause of the earth, the cause of living human beings and animals and plants, all of these things, the cause had to be greater than the effect. Think about this as we go through the lesson this morning. How did it all get here? That's a fair question. A lot of people really don't know. A lot of people are really not interested in answering the question. They're not concerned with it. When you think about the fact that you will die one of these days, it surely is something you want to take into serious consideration. How did it all get here? And what happens to us when we die? Many scientists observe the universe. They're naturalists, and they believe in nature. And they attribute everything we have to natural causes. I would say most of these scientists are evolutionists. They need some kind of natural explanation as to how things happen. They may call it the Big Bang. Not all scientists refer to it as a Big Bang. Some deny a Big Bang, some affirm it. But they don't want to attach anything supernatural as the cause. But if you think about the question, I am firmly convinced that the cause is much greater than the effect. And if we have life, you breathe. If you stop breathing, you're dead. But in between now and then, you're living. What started life? What started the fishes in the seas? What started the birds of the air? What started all the plants of this world? And where did man come from? And why is there such a distinct difference between the average person and the smartest of the ape family? You cannot have a conversation with an ape. But a human can have a conversation with a human. How did all this happen? Where did life come from? And you think about Genesis 1:1. Is it just by accident that when the Bible begins, it assumes that God assumes that people believe He exists? In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. In Genesis 1:1, you find 5 basic fundamental laws of science. How did Moses know that? He didn't. God had to tell him. So in the beginning, you have time. That tells us that before the beginning, time did not exist. And the second thing you have, in the beginning, God. God is force. There's your cause. And then God created, and that's energy. And then you have space, the heavens and the earth, matter. Think about that. Moses was a smart man, but he wasn't that smart. He was not smart enough to start the Bible with such a fundamental statement that declares all the areas of science necessary for existence. Now, the Apostle Paul was one of the greatest preachers that you'll read about in the New Testament. He'd be second to Jesus, but probably one of the best right under the Lord. The Lord gave him his knowledge, but he didn't give him his drive. When Paul was converted, he was in Athens, and he was moved in Acts chapter 17 by seeing that city filled with idols. He was moved to the point that he could not help but go and talk to those people about all their gods. And then he says, I see you have an altar with the inscription to the unknown God. And Paul proceeds to say, let me tell you about him. He's the creator of all things. And you need to go read Acts 17 and see how he progresses through that. And ultimately, some people were converted after Paul's sermon was finished. But Paul makes it clear. He says, the God who made the world and all things in it, since he is Lord of heaven and earth, he himself gives to all people life and breath in all things. Now the atheist will deny that. The naturalist will deny that. The evolutionist will deny that. But we'll get to it in a moment, but the question is, how did life begin? Does life come from non-life? Can non-life produce life, or does it take life to produce life? It's not a difficult question. It may be difficult for some people to answer because they don't like the answer. But Paul keeps on going. He says, let me tell you something else about how we humans got here. He made from one man, and that would be Adam, every nation of mankind to live on all the face of the earth, having determined their appointed times and the boundaries of their habitation. Now, Paul says a lot in a few words here, but one thing he makes clear, let me tell you how we humans got here. It started with a man called Adam. And we read in Genesis 2 and verse 7 that God formed man out of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. And man became a living soul or a living being. Dirt does not come alive on its own. You know you're made out of dirt? It may be wet dirt, but I promise you when you're buried, you give it enough time, you'll go back to the dust. Just like Adam was made of dust. Not only did God create man, he created the nations. You want to know where all the nations came from? A gene pool. That's another lesson. But it's a gene pool. We all started with one man, but then God determined where people would live. And no doubt that happened at the Tower of Babel in Genesis chapter 11 when he scattered people all over the earth, changed their languages. But now, keep reading with me. Why did he do that? That they would seek God, if perhaps they might grope for him and find him. Though he is not far away from any one of us. Now, Paul's talking to people who do not even know who God is. And they have all these idols, and they have an altar with an inscription to the unknown God. And he walks through all this, and he sure covers a lot of territory, doesn't he? And you have to hope that they were really listening to what Paul said. I'm so thankful that the Holy Spirit had Luke to write it down for us to teach today. Because it still teaches today just like it did in Paul's day. But now, something else that Paul said in that sermon in Acts 17, verse 28, for in him we live and move and exist or have our being, even as some of your own poets have said, for we are also his children or offspring. Now that's not a declaration of a spiritual child of God like you consider a child of God as a Christian. The basic statement is, we are the products of a God who made us. In the physical sense, every human being is a child of God or the product of God. Now, that doesn't mean they're Christians. But where did we all come from? God's called our Father. We are His children in the physical sense. Not the spiritual necessarily. That's a different discussion. But that tells where we came from. Now, when you think about design, I meant to put this up here, but I didn't. So you just take a little simple coat rack I made for Lisa the other day. I've had this on my to-do list for some time. And I made it out of a piece of, I believe it's cherry wood. At first I thought it was cedar, but at any rate, it came from a tree. Where'd that tree come from? Well, somehow, somewhere, a seed was planted and produced the tree that wood came from. I used a level. It has a little liquid in it and a little bubble. Where did the liquid come from to make that little level work so I could put that level on the wall? Where did the steel come from to make the screws that I anchored the coat rack to the wall with on the hammerhead that I used? Where did the plastic come from in the screwdriver that I used? The cause is greater than the effect. It came from the earth. All of those things came from the earth. They didn't drop from outer space. Where did the earth come from? Design. Let's go to something a little more complex. As we think about design, a hammer is a fairly simple object. A coat rack is a very simple thing. And a screw or a screwdriver, even that level is really not all that complicated. But there's something else more complicated. John Ray was an English, 17th century English botanist. And he studied the natural world. And his study caused him to be increasingly impressed with design of the things that he saw. Of Ray's numerous examples, he paid particular attention to the vision systems. There's not a more complicated camera in the world than the human eye. If I'm going to have an operation done on one or more of my eyes, I want to make sure that that ophthalmologist is a trained surgeon and he understands the human eye. He understands how the treatment of it. He knows about all the nerves and he understands where things are, what to deal with and what to leave alone and how to, it's like, you want somebody who knows, but the eye's very complicated. Let's look at a very simple thing. The pupil dilates and contracts in dim and bright conditions. When you go to the doctor and he dilates your eyes, it causes the pupil to enlarge. And that's why you want to wear some kind of sunglasses when you go outside, because it's letting more light into the eye and because the pupil has been dilated. But in normal conditions, you ever notice when you're in a darker situation and you step outside, at first it's kind of bright. Well, the next thing you know, your eyes will adjust to the difference in the light. Who made the eye to be able to do that? I've watched that in our cat's eyes. We can see her eyes when she goes outside, they just turn into little slits. But when she's in the house, the pupils are very large. The eye, that incoming light will form an image. But after passing through the lens of the eye, it is inverted. In other words, it's upside down. Nonetheless, the nerves somehow present the image in its right or natural posture to the soul. Did you know that you're really seeing things upside down? But then the eye turns it over. Now that's what a man discovered in the 17th century. That was a long time ago. But he studied it. These nerves to the eyes are bundled together, forming an optic nerve which runs through the retina and back to the brain. So you see, I'm looking in the room, well, that my eye is sending a message to my brain. Your eyes are sending a message to your brain. You can see the screen, you can see the lights, you can see the colors. But the optic nerve does not run through the center of the retina, but off to the side for improved vision. Somebody designed that eye. The images from the two eyes are combined to form depth perception. John Ray, the wisdom of God manifested in the works of creation, written in 1691. He could figure that out a long time ago. But again, the skeptics, what's a skeptic? Well, a skeptic could be a maybe there's a God. Or he could say maybe there's not. The agnostic. I hear that some atheists will say there's really no such thing as an agnostic. If you doubt, then you don't believe. And he may be right about that. An agnostic is in trouble. A skeptic is in trouble. You can't be skeptic about your Creator, because if you are, you'll be skeptic about your destiny. And that's a very serious thing to take into consideration. People must not toy with the idea of whether or not God exists, because they are taking a terrible chance of dying without being prepared to meet Him. Now, skeptics they reject anything beyond the material explanation of the universe, its origin, existence, and its complexity. Oh, well, yeah, it's complex. There are some who recognize, however, that design, example of the eye or the human heart or the central nervous system of the body, or all the 206 bones that you have in your body, which all have a specific purpose, by the way. You think about those things, they still say, well, there's no God. Precious people, some people would not believe Jesus when they clearly saw His miracles. Some people will not see the miracle of creation. But the evidence is abundant. And it's very clear that the cause is greater than the effect. We are the effect. Something greater than us is the cause. And if life does not come from non-life, then whatever we came from has always existed. Now, Albert Einstein, one of the smartest people that lived in some of our time, he made the following observation. Now, he was an atheist. Let's just not be unclear about that. But he noted this. In a book on a centenary volume dealing with Einstein, Einstein said religious feelings takes the form of a rapturous amazement at the harmony of natural law. Now, you know, he was a mathematician, but he looked at the universe and everything was in balance. And there's an amazement to it. He says, which reveals an intelligence of such superiority that compared with it all the systematic thinking and acting of human beings, it is utterly insignificant reflection. What is he saying? You pare it all down. There's something greater than us behind all this. Now, he knew that. It's amazing to me that people can see that, but somehow they won't take it where it ought to go. God asked Job, you remember studying Job and how his friends had tried to blame him for his suffering. You've done something wrong, Job, or you wouldn't be dealing with all this suffering. Well, finally, Job chapter 38, God begins asking Job some questions. Got some questions for you, Job. Here's one of them. You need to go read all of Job 38 if you want to get the big picture. But I had to pull this verse out. Who has put wisdom in the innermost being, or given understanding to the mind? Why is it? Somebody pointed out recently that something that some ape did in response to something is like, wow, you know, it's like that was really amazing. When's the last time you had a conversation with any animal? Now, maybe it was one-sided, fair enough, but I mean that an animal communicated back to you other than a bark from a dog or a meow from a cat or whatever. You can't have a conversation with an animal, but you can sure have one with another human being. Now, if your animals are talking to you, we need to meet after service today. But in all seriousness, you don't have conversations with anyone of any value except human beings. A conversation, I mean, you talk, they talk, you talk about what you all talked about. You're back and forth. You can reason together. You can compare this with that and discuss situations and discuss likes and dislikes and in life and your hobbies and your spiritual and your secular interests and you can interact with human beings. You can also reason. How did we get here? Somebody made this microphone I'm talking through. I was just thinking about how silly some people's arguments are. To reason things out. Let's just say I made this little coat rack for Lisa and somebody says, "You make that?" No, I don't know where it came from. We just walked in the bedroom and there it was hanging on the wall. Nobody made it? No. It just showed up on its own. Lisa, where'd it come from? I don't know. It just showed up in the bedroom. Now, we know that is so silly. Something as simple as a piece of wood with some hooks on it and some screws to hold it to the wall. You know it didn't make itself, but you look at the complexity of the universe, the complexity just of the chemical elements of Earth, the chemical elements of a human being, the physical aspects, the ability to reason, to ask and answer questions. We just came from nothing. Some people will deny what they see because they don't want to believe. That's why you can't convert some people to Jesus, by the way. But think about it. There's a body of evidence to be explained. Why is it that at one time the people thought that the earth was the center of the universe? Well, there was a scientist who said, no, the sun's the center of the universe. And he was excommunicated from a certain church saying that. Well, come to find out he was right. He figured it out. And so we go around, the earth goes around the sun one time a year, except leap year, in an elliptical pattern, like an egg, so to speak. It's not a perfect circle. It's an elliptical. So that's why you have winter, because the earth is on a tilt. You'll have winter part of the time, and you'll have summer. You have your seasons, because the earth continues to go around the sun on an angle. And so, but why is it that we are not so close to the sun that we don't burn up? Why doesn't that ever get off course? Why is it that we don't move too far away from the sun, that we don't freeze to death? Somebody put it into motion. Someone greater than us I say simple. It's not simple. But put that into motion. And why is the sun still there? Why do we have the moon? Did you know the moon causes the ocean currents to rise and fall? You know why that's important? Keep the beaches clean. Keep the water flowing the way it should. Why do we get all this rain? Clean the earth, water the plants, help us survive. Why is the oxygen level just right until you get too high on a certain mountain? So I don't go up there, there's not enough oxygen, but I haven't heard anybody dying up there yet because of the lack of oxygen. There's less of it. They might get dizzy. But why all this balance? Now tell me that it just happened. There are only two options for explaining the universe and all in it. It's all material or natural, or it's supernatural. Those are the only options. And even a scientist will say that, but those unbelievers are going to lean toward number one. Now I want you to think about the absurdity of this. Well, if nothing supernatural is behind it, then the material universe created itself. Now you tell me if that's silly or not. Or something greater than us has caused it, and it's always been, because life comes from life. You ever been on a farm? You ever been to a hospital and seen somebody's new baby? Where'd you get it? Oh, it just came from nowhere. Matter of fact, we didn't even know we were going to have a baby. It just showed up. Well, of course, we know that sounds silly, but it's not as silly as saying the universe made itself. That there's nothing greater behind it than the material itself. Michael Beebe, who's a biochemist at the Discovery Institute Center for Science and Culture, said science is not a game. And scientists must follow the physical evidence wherever it leads, with no artificial restrictions. What is Mr. Beebe saying? When you examine the evidence, you have to be honest with the evidence. Well, where did it come from? And to be superficial, that's another way of saying lying, not telling the truth. And a lot of people, young people today, are increasingly, I want you to listen to me. Our young people are increasingly, at a rapid rate, becoming atheists. Because the scientific world is playing on their minds. I want to pause here. It's happened to two of ours. It breaks my heart. I don't know how it happened. I do know how it happened, and I don't know how it happened. All I know is it happened. Two of ours are as solid as a rock. I don't know how it happened, but I know this, they're wrong. And we're wrong to go along with it or to support it in any shape, form, or fashion. And I pray for those two regularly. And maybe you have some in your family. And it's sad. It's heartbreaking. But just because certain people say it's not true doesn't mean it's not true. And we need to be firm. Listen to me. We need to be firm in our convictions about our origin and about our Creator and about our faith in God. Christianity is not a game either. It's the real thing. If science is not a game, neither is Christianity. Isaiah wrote this in Isaiah 44 and verse 24. Thus says the Lord your Redeemer and the one who formed you from the womb. I, the Lord, am maker of all things, stretching out the heavens by myself and spreading out the earth all alone, causing the omens of boasters to fail, causing wise men to draw back and turning their knowledge into foolishness. Now, Mr. Ray from England was wise enough to see the evidence. A lot of scientists today are beginning to examine the evidence and draw conclusions. They've been wrong about some things. And some of them will never change their minds. But there's no difference in that and your neighbor across the street who believes in God but refuses to listen to Him. There's no difference. But we are the people who need to realize, I don't know everything. I told a fellow the other day, I said, I made C's in school. I could have made better, but I didn't care. But once we start studying the Bible and start applying things, we can be smarter than the fools. The Bible will teach us that. And it leads us in the right direction. Now, Isaiah goes on to say, confirming the word of his servant and performing the purpose of his messengers. Now, let's read that again. The Lord is the maker of all things. He stretches out the heavens. God says, by myself, I spread out the earth all alone, causing the omens of boasters, that's witchcraft, and people that brag that they can do this or that, causing what they say to fail, but it causes men to draw back. What does? The acts of God in the world. And it turns their knowledge into foolishness. But Isaiah says it confirms the word to his servant. What are you saying, Isaiah? They may think it's foolishness. But Isaiah says, I don't think it's foolishness. I know God exists. I know that God formed me in my mother's womb. I know that He stretched out the heavens. I know that He's responsible for the earth. And it gives me the power to be His messenger. See, it's important to believe in God because it affects our messages and the way we deal with life. Isaiah said in Isaiah 40 and verse 2, speaking of God, it is He who sits above the circle of the earth, and its inhabitants are like grasshoppers. Now, Isaiah lived about 700 BC. BCE, if you want to be politically correct. I don't think he had a telescope, and I don't think he had a spaceship. I don't think he ever went any higher than maybe a high point somewhere on the earth. How could Isaiah, in his day, know that the earth was a circle? How could he know it was round? When even, a few hundred years ago, a lot of people thought it was flat. We got people today, they're called flat earthers. They're flat wrong. Isaiah was right. The earth is a circle. But how did he know that? I want you to think about what we're reading here. We'll talk about the Bible in another lesson. But how did he know that? How did Isaiah know that God formed him in his mother's womb? Well, he may have gotten some clue about that. But you ever been up in an airplane, helicopter? People look like grasshoppers, don't they? And I'm going to tell you this. God could go to the highest mountain and still not necessarily see the earth in a circle. Now, maybe somebody says, wait just a minute, preacher. People can study the arc of the earth. Maybe so. But it's still called a circle. In 700 BC. Now, Job said, probably the first book of the Bible written, he stretches out the north over empty space and hangs the earth on nothing. How'd you know that, Job? When's the last time you went into outer space? You have a telescope of some kind, or, did you have some kind of supernatural experience? You've been out in outer space? He hangs the earth on nothing. It's not been that long ago that we figured that out. Not been that long ago. NASA's been into space, taking pictures. And Job was right. He hangs the earth on nothing. Every house is built by someone, but the builder of all things is God. Hebrews 3 and verse 4. Now, the universe and all it contains was either self-created, or it's always been, or created by something greater and something new. Those are the options. Stephen Hawking was an atheist. He was a physicist. Very intelligent man, but he was an atheist. But he wrote a book a few years ago called A Brief History of Time, from the Big Bang to the black holes. And even he realized that the universe has not existed forever. It's amazing what people can see. They may refuse to see the origin, but they can recognize the facts. Now, you want to read his material, I've cited the source. The law of biogenesis is very clear that life can only come from life. Scientists have tried and tried and tried in laboratories to produce life from something not living. They've never done it, and they never will. This sister put a picture of her beautiful cat on Facebook yesterday. She said, well, he's a year old. I got him. He was just a little kitten. Every kid knows. They may not understand all the details. They know the cats come from cats. And if the kids ever been on a farm, I guarantee you they know where horses and cows and chickens come from. They go collect the eggs. And if that egg's been fertilized and that hen sits on it long enough, it'll hatch and that'll become a little chicken. Where'd that egg come from? What came first, the chicken or the egg? You read Genesis chapter 1, the chicken came first. And obviously God made a hen and a rooster. The hen laid an egg, rooster fertilized it, and out comes a chicken. And so life is perpetuated in the poultry line of living things. What caused that chicken to have life? The law of biogenesis is clear. Man cannot produce life from non-living things. Some have boasted that they can, but they're liars. and they know it. Don't let scientists try to buffalo you with false information. Observe the facts like Mr. Beebe said. You know, in spite of the willful denial of atheists and evolutionists, life does not come from non-life. God is eternal. Genesis teaches us that very clearly. He's without beginning and he's without end. I want you to pause with me for just a moment before we look at a couple of other things. If something, even if you didn't have a Bible, if something is here, something greater had to have caused it. You may not know what, but you know it did. And if life is here, you know that some kind of life brought life here. You may not know it's eternal, but that's the only conclusion you could draw. Because life can't come from non-life. Listen, I do not have to understand the eternal nature of God to believe that it's true. Because I live in a time sphere. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. 2 Peter 3:10, Peter says, one of these days it's going to stop. He's going to come burn the earth up and all the works that are in it. Right now we're in it. But before Genesis 1:1 was declared, before that, there was no time. You see, God doesn't live in time. God's not a physical being. He's a spirit, John 4, verse 24. Jesus was the eternal Word that became flesh, has always been. God's always been. Life has always been with them. We have it. Life without God in the mind produces moral depravity. I want you to think about Romans chapter 1 with me very quickly. I'm not going to delve into the details, but I'm going to look at some points here. He says in verse 18 of Romans 1, for the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness. Because that which is known about God is evident within them, for God made it evident to them. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes, his eternal power, note verse 20, invisible attributes, you can't see his attributes, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood through what has been made, so that they are without excuse. Now Paul laid it on the line, but he keeps on going. He says, you know, they knew God in verse 21, they didn't honor him of God, they didn't give thanks. You want to see what the digression of atheism is? They do not honor God. They don't give thanks. They become futile in their speculations. In their foolish heart was darkened. Professing to be wise, they became fools. So the next thing you said, they exchanged the glory of the incorruptible God for an image of the corruptible man and of birds and four-footed animals and living creatures, idols. Therefore God gave them over to the lust of their hearts, to impurity, so that their bodies would be dishonored among them. Look at verse 25, for they exchanged the truth of God for a lie. Now, folks, that's where we are. One side of the fence or the other. And worshipped and served the creature rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. And so then he goes on to discuss homosexuality. You see how it gets worse and worse, and it's very clear. And he says this is unnatural in verse 26. And there's no natural affection. The women turn in there toward desire toward one another, men with men committing indecent acts and receiving in their own persons the penalty of error. Just as they did not to acknowledge God any longer, God gave them over to a depraved mind to do those things which are not proper, being filled with all unrighteousness, wickedness, greed, evil, full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, malice. They are gossips, slanderers, haters of God, insolent, arrogant, boastful, inventors of evil, disobedient to parents, without understanding, untrustworthy, unloving, unmerciful. You see what happens when people get rid of God? You want to know what's wrong with our culture? People, so I remember talking to a fellow one time, he said, no, I believe in God. I said, no, you don't. Well, what do you mean? I said, because you don't live like you believe in God. There's a difference. And these people didn't. And he says, look at verse 32. Although they know the ordinance of God, that those who practice such things are worthy of death, they not only do the same, but also give hearty approval to those who practice them. So you just see what happens when God is out of the picture. But here's the thing. God's made himself known by the universe, by the Word, by us, by everything we experience. I'm not a perfect man. You're not a perfect man or woman. You never will be until the Lord makes you perfect. That's the only way. You see, the purpose to go in a positive direction is Jesus came. I know the Jews rejected him, but that didn't mean he wasn't the Son of God. The proof is there. To become a Christian and live for God so that you act like you believe that God exists. It's easy to talk, but it's better to live it. Become a Christian. We have a lady that mentioned this morning she's wanting to be baptized. We want to study with her. I wish more people would come to that conclusion and study. We have a decision to make. I believe in God.